Okay, here we go. This is going to be a very, very, very long part, and that's slightly unnerving. Because long levels are always a pain sometimes, especially when it comes to doing commentary. What's particularly annoying is that this particular level is not nearly as thrilling as it could be, considering its ridiculous length. Now, I believe at the minute we are in the Poseidon room. The reason I say this is because of the water. Basically, as you probably figured out from earlier on when we were in the Hephaestus room, they tend to go for rooms that match the mythological person that they are dealing with. So Poseidon is one of the Greek gods that most people know. One of the 12 Olympic deities. Son of Cronus and Rhea, and brother to Hades, Demeter, Hestia, Hera, and Zeus. And he is also the father of Theseus, Triton, Polyphemus, Belus, Agenor, Neleus, and Atlas. And Atlas is important because we are going to come across the Atlas door eventually. So Poseidon's a kind of very interesting god, because being king of the sea, god of the sea, whatever you want. Largely because he does tend to turn up quite a lot. In a lot of things. And I want... Oh yes, he's in the Odyssey, he's in the Aeneid, and he's in the Iliad. So he turns up in the three really main Greek tales that have lasted for so long. At this point I feel slightly bad because I've only, of the three, I've only ever read the Aeneid. But I'll get to the Iliad and the Odyssey eventually. Although I should fix that by saying the Odyssey and the Iliad are Homer, so they are Greek, and the Aeneid is Virgil, which is in Latin, and it's from Rome. Pretty sure I'm right. Yeah. Yes. I am correct. That would be rather embarrassing if I was incorrect in my definition of where the Aeneid came from. Says the English literature student who should know this stuff. So, basically with this particular room, the puzzle revolves around raising and lowering the water level. It's basically the water temple from Ocarina of Time. And it's just as tedious, really. Because basically it's ever so slightly difficult to tell exactly where you've got to put things. So you need to pull that lever to get that raft, because you need that raft to get the key. However, what the game doesn't tell you is that you need this block here. I mean, it's pretty obvious that you're going to need it somehow, because they wouldn't have put it there otherwise. Still, it's just like, especially if you've lowered the water level without picking it up. It's just like, no! Also, I have to. I've noticed that with the block pushing against the water, it's very, very miffy about where you push it. If you don't push it in just the right way, it's going to yell at you, by not doing what you want it to do. It's more so of a pain on the fish right at the top, but, either way. And I'm pretty sure that the fish statues also appear in Croft Manor, because I seem to recall seeing them in the pool in Remade Legend. Now, I can't say that quite with complete certainty. It's been a very long time since I've seen that version of Croft Manor. Even though we are going to see Croft Manor here in Tomb Raider Anniversary, but the pool isn't in the same state, shall we say. Also, right now, I am putting that raft in completely the wrong spot. Because basically, you need to put it so that it is in the little diagonal patch of water that's going to be there between the two top pathways. Getting it in that position is easier said than done, because if you are a complete idiot like me, and kind of get ever so slightly lost as to the orientation of this room, yeah. So essentially, you are wanting to place it about where I've just put it there, if you can get your orientation correct. This is a really tedious puzzle, really. It basically summarizes Ocarina of Time's Water Temple in miniature, basically. It's just like, yes, thank you for being such a long, tedious pain, with not much of an idea of what the heck you want me to do. Thankfully it's all over and done with now. We can get our key and move on. And the next two rooms that we have to deal with are very, very, very interesting rooms, I have to say. They are very, very interesting puzzles. Because we've got Atlas and Damocles left, I believe. Because there's only 4 keys, I think? Something like that. And yeah, Lara's about to put herself in a lot of danger. Much more so than just pure water and being electrocuted. / being smushed by a hammer. I mean, in this game, Lara puts herself in some really, really deadly situations. Most deadly has to be the end of the game. You will see why. But St. Francis's Folly is particularly dangerous, but for different reasons. It's very much a tomb's tomb. Interesting way of describing it, but there we go. Now, I believe it's at this point that there is a reasonable amount of stuff that we can do in this main room, including getting an artifact or so, if I recall correctly. And if my brain is not deceiving me, I do think that this is one of the longest levels in the game in terms of the amount of stuff you need to do. Because for the most part, the time trials are all under 20 minutes. But I believe this one is somewhere like 28 or so. It's a very nasty thing. Okay, well, the rough length, according to the wonderful source of information that is Wikirader. I'm sorry, I think it's because I go on a website called Games Radar a lot, so any time that Raider turns up very close to something else that's not Tomb, my brain automatically goes, Radar. Ugh. But yes, it's about 35 minutes. Well, I have proven that wrong. I have to say that I apologise for the rather lax quality of the gameplay in this particular run of Tomb Raider Anniversary. But funnily enough, this is the first... Well, this recording... I don't know whether I've mentioned this yet, actually. Probably should have done, considering this is 7 parts in. But this run-through of the game is essentially blind. Because up until very, very recently, I didn't have Tomb Raider Anniversary. And it was only as I was finishing off, I believe, the commentary of Tomb Raider Legend, that I actually got my hands on it. Which is why I did bring it up in Tomb Raider Legend, if I'm recalling correctly. So, because I wanted to do this so soon after beating Tomb Raider Legend, I didn't actually manage to beat the game... Well, I didn't think I would have time to beat the game beforehand. So I was just like, yeah, let's just record it and just see how it goes. I'm sure it'll be fine. I can do nice little edits. Cut down the faff completely and utterly. And I think it's working reasonably well, all things considered. And also sometimes it's nice to see kind of a somewhat competent blind run-through of a game. Obviously, I am being naughty and using a walkthrough so that I can have a walkthrough. Because I honestly believe that the way to play Tomb Raider games is to kind of complete them 100%. Not necessarily do the time trials, but like get all the artifacts and relics and complete the challenges that the game sets you that aren't time trials, that require you to play levels again and again and again. Because Tomb Raider is very much a collectathon-y type platformer, which is really odd to say. Because you don't really have collectathon platformers anymore in games. It's just not the done thing. I mean, literally the closest that I can really think of in terms of collectathon games these days is the Mario games, and even then the 3D Mario games have moved away from what they used to be, which is slightly depressing. But in a sense, Tomb Raider does very much deal with that same kind of thing of platforming, picking up hidden secrets. There's a much greater emphasis on puzzle solving and combat than in standard kind of platformers, but it's still there. And I think you can kind of base that on the fact of when the original game came out, that was the world in which character platformer collectathons were a big thing. I can't quite say that the original Tomb Raider had artifacts and these types of secrets. But still, it's a very important kind of hallmark of things. But I mean, there is also the very, very important element of killing Lara. They seem to quite enjoy that. It's a very dark thing to say, but it's relatively true. Also just found out the very interesting fact that Tomb Raider was made in Derby. Well, the original Tomb Raider, not Tomb Raider Anniversary, but when the original Tomb Raider by Core Design was developed in Derby, which is very, very nearby to where I live when I'm not at university, which is just quite cool. So now we're in the Atlas room. If you hadn't guessed already or figured it out, Atlas is the Titan who holds up the sky, I believe. Something along those lines. Yeah, holds up the celestial sphere, because he was a naughty boy. That was his punishment. Now, this puzzle it's what I'm doing right now is a very cheeky way of getting through it. What the game wants you to do is run and jump at the end of that path. But screw that noise. That's difficult. I'm just gonna cheese it and just do that. It works wonderfully. So yes, poor Atlas having to hold up everything. And obviously he turns up in the story of Heracles as well. And also, my brain is telling me that Atlas helped Prometheus in kind of giving fire to humanity, but I can't remember whether that's true. And the wonderfulness of the wonderful source of information that is Wikipedia, which you think would have this information if it is there in the story, is not there. Oh well. You generally should know Atlas. He's a very common character in Greek mythology. Our next door, however, is not... Well, it's not as well known as Atlas, I would argue, but he's still quite prominent in Greek mythology for a name that we know. So we've got to head for the Damocles door, which houses very, very dangerous place. And I do mean that very seriously. It's deadly. Now, whilst we are climbing, getting our artifact, and then climbing all the way back down, apparently, in 2006, Lara Croft was inducted into the Walk of Game and the Guinness Book of World Records as the most successful human virtual game heroine in... Yeah, that's all I can really say about that. But it's very important. Also, since Tomb Raider was rebooted, in 2011, GK Films acquired the film rights and do plan to release an origin story reboot, so something similar to the 2013 Tomb Raider. And it was announced on 27th of March 2013 that there was a partnership between MGM and GK Films, and it's in development. It's going to be interesting to see how that happens, because the first two Lara Croft Tomb Raider films did really well, all things considered. I believe that the first one did, well, commercially better than the first one. The first film was received rather negatively by critics, as you would expect for most video game films. You just don't get the positivity these days anymore. But yeah, The Cradle of Life did better critically, but worse commercially. So, seeing what's going to happen with the next Tomb Raider film is going to be very interesting indeed. There's also a Tomb Raider ride. I don't know whether it still exists, but it certainly did exist at some point. In Paramount Parks, I believe. But yeah, okay, yes, it's the Tomb Raider element has been removed. And the rides have also since been removed, since like 2008. So, there is no longer an official Tomb Raider ride, although it did exist, funnily enough. And now we head into the Damocles door. We've got an interesting little route ahead of us here. Largely because Damocles is most famous because of a moral anecdote which is commonly referred to as the Sword of Damocles. I'll go into this a little bit more in a second, because this little block here is actually bugged. If you don't pull that thing correctly, then you can't progress. Because if that block falls on its side, the long side, then when you put it under the gate, you can't get the gate high enough so that you can get to the little hole to be able to get through. It's really evil. But there we go. So, Damocles, with the Sword of Damocles. So basically, he was about a courtier in the court of Dionysius II of Syracuse. He exclaimed that Dionysius was a great man of power and authority, surrounded by magnificence, and then Dionysius and Damocles switched places. However, Dionysius arranged that a huge sword should hang above the throne, and It was only held at the pommel by a single hair of a horse's tail, and yeah, so he was put at risk with a sword. And the story of Damocles has turned up in quite a lot of places, including in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, funnily enough. Because it's in the song that Rocky sings, because the sword of Damocles is hanging over my head. And I've got the feeling someone's going to be cutting the thread. It's been a long time since I've heard that particular song. So I can't... Obviously, I could sing, like, Time Warp and so on and so forth, but that one not so much. So the whole thing of the Damocles story is the sword. And as you're going to see shortly, they're going to enjoy dropping swords on our heads. Not quite yet, mind. Before we get that far, we need to pull a lever, which requires us to get up here, just over to above the door, essentially. Because you can see the lever just over there. And there's an artifact beneath those swords, but we can't grab the artifact yet, because, annoyingly, there's loads of swords sticking out of the ground. They're making a very, sharp point here, I think. They're being slightly mean. Either way, now comes the point at which Lara's going to have to face the swords. So not only do we have the massive sword in the main room, now we have other swords trying to slam down into our heads, and swords which are going to come out of the ground and stab us. This bit here is all a little case of timing. It's a really simple path, but obviously it's figuring out what the path is to be able to progress successfully. That is your issue. And then also, try not to run through this section, because if you run, then the swords will activate and potentially skewer you. They don't actually visually skewer Lara, but they do kill you. And that's not fun. Especially when you have to do this section over and over and over again because you keep getting hit. Totally not bitter at all. Don't worry, the bitterness is going to get particularly worse in the penultimate level of the game, because that holds in it a truly horrible section, which I never want the misfortune of having to deal with ever again. Which is one of the reasons why I am so glad that I did this game blind, but with a walkthrough, and recorded it at the same time. Because it's just horrible. And the fact that you literally have to do this particular section, it's not even optional, is just evil. Anyway, there's our artifacts, and now it's time to actually get out of the room, which requires us to get all the way back up to the top segment again, which means we have to go through the sword pit of death. Actually, no, we don't, because we've given ourselves a nice little shortcut here with that lever. They are nice in this instant, but you still don't want to get skewered by swords. because it's very easy to do. Also, the jump that you are about to be asked to do is slightly mean. It's certainly not something that is easy to pull off, but it's a skill that you're going to want to learn, because it's going to come in handy later on, and in fact I think it is also necessary later on to progress, as it is here. Essentially what you need to do is, when you are doing a grapple swing, when you've reached a particular point in your jump, you need to hold back and jump off the wall. So you can see here, it's grapple, jump onto that pillar over there. But it's the jumping back bits that can be a pain, because sometimes when you're controlling Lara, she won't quite aim in the direction that you are wanting her to aim in, which can lead to the frustration of you falling when you really don't want to fall. Also, I'm not particularly a fan of the jump then press X method of pulling out the grapple. I much preferred the AA method, if only because when you're jumping into the abyss, it feels much more natural to press the button that you just used to jump, instead of trying to frantically press a different button. And if I recall correctly, they stuck with this particular method for Tomb Raider Underworld, but I can't quite remember how the grapple swing worked in that game, because it's been a very long time now since I've played Tomb Raider Underworld. I think it's nearly time for me to return to it. You basically got a year of Tomb Raider here. Maybe not the reboot, but certainly the original Crystal Dynamics trilogy, because Tomb Raider's fun. It surprises me that I hadn't really properly played Tomb Raider until so recently. And I do much prefer this older style, because it's... I wouldn't say it's more cartoony, but it's much more aware that it's a video game, and therefore it plays a lot more on platforming challenges and the odd moment of combat challenge, but kind of you have bosses and stuff, and I feel that's missing in the reboot, which is sad. But there we go. We've got all the keys. We just need to get back to the main chamber, get down to the bottom, put those keys into their respective locks, and then we are done with this really stupidly long level. I'm so glad that it's over, because I really do think that this particular level outstays its welcome. It's just that bit too long for its own good, and the area is just that bit too big. I mean, I get the whole, let's have 4 doors with 4 keys and 4 puzzles to complete. That makes sense. It's just that it's so big. I tend to prefer it when levels in games are like half an hour at most, just because then you got a nice lengthy thing, but it doesn't outstay its welcome. Obviously there are exceptions to that, but I'd say in Tomb Raider, having about half an hour is a decent length for a level, I think. But that's the end of that one. So, let us continue, because we're heading into the Colosseum, I believe. Oh dear.